Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about the classes and properties of matter. So first, let's define what matter is. So matter is anything that has mass and occupies space. And we broke down the different types of matter in the previous video. We talked about all matter is either a pure substance or a mixture, and the pure substances are elements and compounds, and the mixtures are homogeneous mixtures or heterogeneous mixtures. So what this class is all about is it's the study of matter. So chemistry is the study of matter. It's the study of the properties of matter, its composition, its structure, the changes. So let's define kind of what properties are, because we're going to be talking about the properties of matter. Properties are a way to describe matter based on observations and measurements. Based on observations and measurements. So there's two types of properties that we're going to talk about in this class. There's what's called an intensive property and what's called an extensive property. So an intensive property is independent of the amount of the substance present. So examples of intensive properties would be like color, shape, scent or odor. Density is something that we haven't talked about yet, but we're going to come back to. This is something that it doesn't matter if you have 1 gram of it or 100 grams of it, the intensive property is the same. So if you have 1 gram of blue powder, it's blue if you have 1 gram of it or 100 grams of it. It doesn't change based on the amount. An extensive property is dependent on the amount of the substance. So these are measurable things like mass, length, volume. We'll talk about this later, but number of moles, which is how many atoms or molecules we have. These are things that we're measuring that are dependent on the amount, and the intensive properties are independent of the amount. The last thing that we should talk about are something called physical properties and chemical properties. And these physical and chemical properties, these are independent of the intensive and extensive properties. These are different, all different categories. Just didn't want you to think that they were lined up under each other because they were the same. So a physical property is something that can be measured or observed without changing the substance. So temperature, example, temperature. A physical property of water, for example, would be its boiling point or its freezing point or its density. So water has a boiling point of 212 degrees Fahrenheit or 100 degrees Celsius. All water is going to boil at that temperature. Boil means you're going from a liquid to a gas. Freezing point, opposite, well, not opposite, but from a solid to a liquid would be 0 degrees Celsius or 32 degrees Fahrenheit. So these can be measured or observed without changing the substance. A chemical property is a property that describes how a substance will react. And the substance will change into a new substance from this property. How it will react, and the substance will change into a new substance from this property. So we're going to spend a lot of time on this when we're looking at chemical reactions. An example of this would be something like oxidation, flammability, how flammable something is, how reactive something is. These are all chemical properties. So in this chapter, we're really just kind of setting the groundwork for a lot of what we're going to be doing later. We're going to be doing different calculations, making different observations of all these different classes and properties of matter.